real is med school biochemistry in a nutshell. And I'm going to give it to you and you're going to understand it. This big square is a cell of your body. Okay? It could be a muscle cell, any cell that you want to call it. Okay? And what I've drawn up here is the metabolism in your body. This part of the cell is liquid. It's about 70% water. It's sort of like slime, ectoplasmic ghoul, if you will, that is the liquid interior of the cell, and it's called cytosol. Inside the cell is the little powerhouse of the cell called the mitochondria. Okay? And metabolism shuttles through there. Your body takes glucose and through an insulin receptor passes glucose into the interior of the cell. Inside the cell are proteins or enzymes that alter the chemical structure of glucose. And in the process of altering its chemical structure, generate energy in the form of phosphates that can be used to drive the machinery of the cell. So it's sort of like generating biodiesel, if you will. Okay? So you go through these processes of about 20 steps. And at the very end of it, you end up with a waste product called pyruvate. And when animals first were crawling around the slime in the very, very beginning of our evolutionary past, that was the extent of our metabolism. But somewhere along the way, little protobacteria and viruses got inside the cell and developed a symbiotic relationship with the cell. And basically they ate our waste products and used it for energy. And at that period of evolution, oxygen was starting to become present in our atmosphere. And these little protobacteria learned how to use oxygen to extract energy from our waste product. So what originally started as a parasite living in our cells became an organelle. And they use pyruvate and they cycle it through something called the Krebs cycle. And that ended up producing not 4 ATP, but 32 ATP. Well, they stopped being parasites and bacteria and actually became organelles inside of our cell, which became part of our energy architecture. Okay? So, when we're making energy, the part that occurs out in the liquid part of the cell is anaerobic metabolism. And the part that occurs inside the mitochondria, driven by oxygen, is called aerobic metabolism. Okay? Now, the weird thing is that even though this produces much less ATP, in terms of cycling this, in terms of turning the churn, this really hauls ass. And this is not so fast. So you can turn the anaerobic cycle really, really quickly. And you can make pyruvate faster than your mitochondria can use it. And when that happens, the pyruvate gets acted on by an enzyme called lactate dehydrogenase, and you end up making lactic acid, which is something y'all are all familiar with. Okay? But in terms of an aerobic workout, to answer your question, the answer is that when you do truly hard work, you are going to cycle this anaerobic process as fast as it can possibly go. And the only way that you can maximally stimulate the aerobic metabolic cycle is by delivering as much substrate as it can handle. So to the extent that you can really ramp this up, you are conditioning this as much as possible. My workouts take about 8 minutes once a week. My resting heart rate's about 48 to 50. Okay? Because of this. Here's the other thing, is you go down to Patrick's place or you have Drew Bay put you through a workout. At the end of the workout, you're going to be laying on the carpet. And what you're going to be doing on that carpet is taking all this pyruvate that you made quicker than the mitochondria could use it and got turned into lactic acid. While you're laying on the carpet, your body takes that lactic acid, brings it back through the central vein of your liver, and in the liver cells there, that lactic acid gets converted back to pyruvate, sent in the bloodstream, sent to your mitochondria, and shuttled through the aerobic cycle. So while you're laying on the carpet recovering, and you get in your car, you go back to your job, you sit at your laptop, for the next hour and a half, you're getting a superior aerobic workout compared to walking on a treadmill for the same period of time. So you are upregulating that aerobic metabolic cycle during that recovery period because you actually did it hard enough to matter. Okay? So that answers the aerobics question. But you kind of get the idea of how energy moves through this whole process. Now, let's talk about Mark Sisson's diet and how it fits into this whole thing. Now, if we are in a fully anabolic state, if anabolic is out of balance relative to catabolic, then we have plenty of energy coming in here, cycling through the process, and in the process of taking all this and converting it to ATP, a byproduct gets stacked up called citrate. Well, citrate acts as a feedback mechanism to a linchpin enzyme in the whole process called phosphofructokinase. It's not important that you remember that. Just know that it's there because this is like the thermostat at the back of the room. And this is like the cold air coming out of the vents. Okay? So when you're in an energy replete environment, getting lots and lots of carbohydrate, lots and lots of glucose, this comes up here and blocks phosphofructokinase. Well, what happens then? You can't go down. Well, all these enzymes that are doing this work are bidirectional. So what ends up happening is you go backwards because your body doesn't want all this glucose stacking up inside the cell because that glucose binds to proteins. It's called glycation byproducts. And it mucks up the metabolic machinery just like pouring pancake syrup on the keyboard of your computer would. Your body doesn't want it, so it wants to protect itself. So it goes backwards up here, and then there's an enzyme called glycogen synthase. And you take those glucose molecules, and you hook them all together like Tinker Toys into this big thing, and you store them in your liver, and you store them in your muscle. But you store about 70 grams of glycogen in your liver. And you can store about 200 grams of glycogen in your muscle. And they're in those two different locations for two completely different reasons. The reason it's in your liver is to maintain a stable blood glucose. If y'all are getting hungry because you haven't had your snack, then what's going to happen is you're going to release a little bit of glycogen from your liver to maintain a stable blood glucose. And that's important because our major evolutionary DNA-driven process that brought us here today was a big brain. That was the evolutionary gamble that worked because some hominid ancestor actually found the ocean and ate lots of omega-3 fatty acids and got a big brain. Okay? But a big brain requires a constant influx of energy. So if it dips a little bit, you tap your liver glycogen, maintain a stable blood glucose so your brain keeps working. Okay? Now, the glycogen that's in your muscle is there for a completely different reason. It's there for emergency on-site usage. It's like the coal car on the train. It's right there to be used on the spot by the muscle in question. Now, take your DNA, go back in the evolutionary basis. The most likely time that an animal is ever going to get attacked is when it's at the watering hole or when it's feeding. Its guard is down. It's concentrating on an anabolic process. And on a dime, it has to turn its metabolism from anabolic to catabolic. And it does that by cleaving thousands upon thousands of molecules of glycogen into glucose out of the muscle for on-site usage to do this. Okay? But that's why they're there. But forget that for right now. We're in a high energy state. So we're going to do this, and we're going to go backwards, and we're going to jam as much as we can in the muscle and as much as we can in the liver. Okay, that's 270 grams. So you go to Starbucks in the morning, you get yourself a nice big bagel and a caramel latte. Guess what? You've topped off your gas tank. You stored all the glycogen you can store. And that's assuming that your gas tank was empty, which it wasn't. Okay? So what happens then? Well, it can't go this way And now it can't go this way. So what happens is it gets stuck at this level of fructose, or phosphofructokinase. And through a metabolic process that occurs in this high energy state, fructose gets converted to something called glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. You take 3 of those, link them together, and you got triglycerides. Triglycerides get mobilized in your body and stored in your body fat, which becomes an ever-expanding reservoir. Okay? Well, now that you're doing this, you can only do this at a certain rate, so glucose starts to stack up in the bloodstream. Well, what's your body's response to that? Make more insulin. Well, your body doesn't want insulin to be moving glucose into the cell because it's trying to prevent it from having glycation damage. So what does it do? It decreases your number of insulin receptors on your muscle cells and other cells of your body, except for one place. The insulin receptors on your body fat stay intact. What your body fat is, in addition to being an energy storage depot, is a mechanism of protecting yourself from glycation end products. But it only works up to a certain point. So what ends up happening here is you have developed something called internal starvation. Okay? Energy is inputted. It can't go here. It can't go here. It can only go here. The glucose starts to stack up, and your insulin levels get high, and your insulin receptors go down everywhere except here. But the problem is, if your energy levels start to wane, you can't tap any energy out of your stored body fat because the hormone that does that, hormone-sensitive lipase, is sensitive to insulin. Insulin will not allow you to tap body fat. So when you have an elevated serum insulin, you can't mobilize body fat. So what happens is as soon as your energy levels start to wane, you become ravenously hungry because you got to jack up your energy levels short term, but then it just does this. And you can't tap it out of there. And the weirdest thing that I only noticed in the past couple of years is I've looked at hundreds of thousands of CT scans over the years. And I always had it in my head that the morbidly obese were probably pretty well muscled underneath all that because effectively they're lifting weights all the time. But it's not the case. Their muscles are extraordinarily atrophied. Your external oblique muscle that ought to be about, as thick as a piece of steak, in these people is paper thin and stretched to the point of bursting. If you look at their spinal erector muscles on the cross-section of the CT scan, which basically takes pictures of you like a honey-baked ham slices. If you look at it, you look at the lumbar extensor muscles, what should be about the size of the barrel of a baseball bat is as small as this magic marker. Because they are having nutrient partitioning that doesn't allow any energy to go anywhere but the body fat. So they can't support any sort of preservation of muscle mass. So they are literally starving inside an encasement of blubber. So this whole process of metabolic derangement I like to think of as a tub overflowing. And the diet Mark Sisson talked to you about is taking that overflowing tub and turning off the spigot. What I like to offer with the exercise protocol that we talk about in the book is a way to pull the drain plug. Okay, because high-intensity exercise does something very special. It mobilizes, remember we talked about the glycogen in the muscle. You have the greatest number of potential insulin receptors on the surface of your muscle cells. But the cool thing is if you bring a high-intensity exercise stimulus to your body, then what will happen is the glucose that gets cleaved out of the muscle's glycogen is done so by what's called an amplification cascade.